Hello and welcome. I suspect you're here because you're a Tesla owner with the full self-driving capabilities enabled on the car and found yourself with a safety score that is not quite as high as it needs to be involved in the early beta release. So, if you will stick with me for a few minutes, I'm going to explain a few things about the system, how it was reverse engineered, and some of the steps you can take to fix your daily errors before they become part of your permanent record. Dun dun dun, permanent record. All right, before we get too deep into the weeds on how this all works, let's take a quick minute and look at the documentation from Tesla. And if you go to tesla.com/support/safety-score, there's a great page that gives a lot of specific details on each of the different parameters and how they're graded and what is measured in determining your safety score. So Tesla has 5 safety factors, and each of these combine in calculating your safety score. I've highlighted important sections in each of these 5 categories. Take a minute, pause the video, and make sure you understand each of those before moving on, because they will be helpful. The first one is forward collision warnings, and I'm going to just pass over this because if you're running into this, I don't know what's going on. I've never had a forward collision warning in 3 years of owning the car, so I'm not sure where this comes from, other than maybe in urban areas with pedestrians. I've seen bikes, I've seen pedestrians. I've never had a problem with it so far. So we'll skip that one. The next category is hard braking. Hard braking is when you slam on the brakes, basically lock them up, as you may know it. This is one where you feel yourself lunging forward as the brakes are being applied, and everybody else in the car throws you a look like, what the hell are you doing? The next category is aggressive turning, and I just like to think of this as the NASCAR turn, where if you don't have a bank as part of the turn, you are going too fast or too tight of a turn for that rate of speed. Next, we have unsafe following, aka tailgating, and this one is actually the one that catches most people off guard. Not only because it's difficult to figure out how to work within the system, but also somebody could cut you off at any time. They can just move in front of you and you're penalized. Lastly, there's forced autopilot disengagement. And this one is kind of another one I'm just going to pass over, because basically what you have to do here is ignore the warnings, the repeated warnings several times, and then finally autopilot will disengage. You should never run into this. And if you do, you probably shouldn't be using the beta. All right, now for the math class time. Determining your score. This is a bunch of blah, 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 blah math, blah, 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 blah math, blah, 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 blah math, billions of miles, millions of miles, percentage of error, SPSS, statistical models, blah, blah, blah. The second to last paragraph, though, is actually kind of interesting. It says your safety score is not impacted by the number of miles or hours you drive. And then they go on to say that they combine your daily safety scores up to 30 days into a mileage weighted average to calculate the aggregated safety score, which, if you understand what that means, your daily average gets weighted by your daily mileage. Keep this in mind. So a lot of the descriptions I just gave lead into the idea of how do you improve your safety score, and those are covered in this next section. They're pretty much common sense, right? Don't tailgate, don't do hard turns, don't hit the brakes hard. Common sense stuff, really. The next section is a little bit more interesting. All right, so in the facts section, there's a couple things I'd like to point out. One, the question of how often will my safety score be updated? This is actually real time. As soon as you stop the car, put it into park, open the door and get out, your score is sent to the mothership. Within a minute or so, the Tesla app will have an updated score for you in most cases. Another important factor is highlighted in this safety score update section, which is that your data, once it's saved for the day, can never be changed again. Trust me, I tried. You can't trick the system into changing previous data. There's also a very important nugget of information in the question, is all my driving data captured? The answer to this is yes, except when you're driving in autopilot. And that includes any trips that are longer than 1/10 of a mile. And when autopilot is engaged, the miles will count towards your total, but the incidents, whether it be aggressive turning, too close following, or disengagements, will not count against you. There are some skeptics on the internet that have questioned whether or not autopilot incidents negatively affect your score. They do not. I have proof of it, and I'll share that with you guys later. But one other important thing in here is this note about autopilot counting towards your total mileage. This is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on the situation. For example, let's say you have a score of 95 for the day. You don't want to do a bunch of autopilot driving and rack up some miles, because that will negatively impact your overall score. It's not going to impact your daily score, but it will impact your overall score. If you've got 100, go do a ton of driving on autopilot, because that is a positive for you. But if it's below 100, don't. So the first step was figuring out how these overall ratings are calculated from your daily ratings. And then how do you increase your overall rating by manipulating the daily values? So I did some math. I calculated some things. I created a spreadsheet. I had everything I needed to calculate how many miles I needed to go in order to raise my score up. My starting point was a grade of 95. And if I wanted to step that up to 96, I needed to figure out how many miles I needed. And so I set my target score of 95.5, which I supposed would round up to 96. So as you can see here on day 2, if I wanted to raise my target score to 95.5, I needed to drive just over 4 miles. So what I did was drive 5 miles, stopping each mile and checking the app as I progressed. I found the score changed to 96 after driving the 5th mile. For several days, I copied the daily score and miles out of the Tesla app into my spreadsheet and found that the overall grade matched. I continued and checked when I thought it would jump up to 96 for real, and then did the check at 97. And by this point, I was feeling fairly confident in the algorithm. This is interesting because Tesla says that your overall score is not dependent on the miles traveled, but that's not entirely correct. While your daily score may not be dependent on the miles traveled, your overall score is calculated from your daily score weighted by the miles you travel that day in relationship to all miles traveled over all the days. Let me give you this quick example. Let's say on day 1, you get a score of 95 and you've traveled 10 miles. On day 2, you get a score of 80 because somebody cut in front of you and did some unsafe following or something. But you traveled 20 miles that day. So as a result, your overall score has dropped after day 1 from 95 all the way down to 85, which is far closer to 80 than it is to 95 because you traveled twice as far on day 2. It's a fairly straight process to figure out how many miles you need to drive at a 100% daily score to increase your overall score. But that's not so easy to do. Things happen all the time that reduce your daily score below 100%. My spreadsheet allows you to set a lower goal, maybe 99, and calculate the miles from that. But I'm not going to publish my spreadsheet. Instead, I'm going to provide a link in the description for another great tool by the guys at NoTeslaApp. It's a great calculator. It'll do exactly what we need for figuring out how many miles to drive. So what do we do if we've driven 100 miles on a day and all of a sudden we had an unsafe event that took our daily score from 100 down to 95? How can we reverse that? How can we mitigate that impact? And that's what we're going to do with the next 3 videos in this series. First, we'll look at hard braking. That's the easiest to fix. From there, we'll go to unsafe following and we'll wrap up with the most difficult, aggressive turning. I hope you enjoyed this really basic intro video. The interesting thing is going to come in the next 3 videos. Please like and subscribe. And if you subscribe, be sure to click the bell so you'll be notified when the new videos get released. Thanks for watching.